All right, hey guys, welcome to Through the Bible Verse by Verse, a plain and simple study of the entire Bible, book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse. Currently, we are in Deuteronomy chapter 22. So let's get through it. Now, I just want to say also, by way of reminder, this is the last address of Moses, literally his last days. And though we have been going through this book now for several days, I think a couple of weeks. Keep in mind that if you just read it, just read it straight through, you can probably read the entire book of Deuteronomy in a couple of hours, a little over a couple of hours. And certainly if you give the address as Moses is doing, you can do it in a couple of hours. So my point is, this is not a long period of time. This is his last address, and then he's going to literally go up and die, or at least disappear from Israel. They would never see him again. And so the book of Deuteronomy it's oftentimes called the second law, but it's really not the second law. It's really more of a highlight. It's an exhortation as Moses is leaving. Remember, this was the man that God used to deliver Israel, but also give them the law. He is the canon, you can say. He is the measurement of God's truth, because God used him, appeared to him, to give this truth. So he's getting ready to leave. And so after the book of Deuteronomy, Israel will begin their journey without Moses, who has been the foundation of Israel. All right, so Deuteronomy chapter 22, and all right, so he says, verse 1 says, if you see your brother's ox or sheep straying, you must not ignore it. Make sure you return it to your brother. Now, I want to stop and say something about this verse here. And this is a kind of a sidebar issue, but oftentimes people who highlight certain sins, glorify certain sins, and the fact that they don't do them. Remember, every command of God is a command, and not to do it would be sin. So, in other words, to say that if you see your brother's ox and going astray, and then you ignore it, remember, that would be sin as well. And I'm saying that is because we don't like to highlight these as sins, but they're just as much as sin. Okay. All right, verse 2. If your brother does not live near you, or you don't know him, you are to bring the animal to your home to remain with you until your brother comes looking for it. Then you can return it to him. Do the same for his donkey, his garment, or anything your brother has lost and you have found. So right there, anything, right? Anything that your brother has lost. So if we want to apply it to the day, again, a watch, a wallet, a car, right? The point is, don't hoard it. He said it would be a sin. God would consider it a sin if you just hoarded that and you don't return it to them. That is as much sin, as adultery. Okay. Verse 4, if you see your brother's donkey or ox falling down the road, you must not ignore it. You must help him, lift him up. In other words, stop and help him. That's what he's saying right here. So God considered this as much righteous as well. All right, verse 6 says, a woman is not to wear male clothing, and a man is not to put on a woman's garment. For everyone to do these things is detestable in the Lord your God, to the Lord your God. Now, I just want to make a quick note about this. If you're Pentecostal holiness, the old school Pentecostal holiness, they use this verse. They use this verse to say that women cannot wear pants. And there are still Pentecostal churches that preach that, and they come under the title of holiness and what their version of holiness is. And the problem, of course, is, when this verse was put out, pants wasn't even a garment as we know it today, and And even now, if you think about it, if I was to put on a pair of my wife's pants, you would know it. Let me just say this: the only garment really that God has commanded to be made was specifically for the priest. So in other words, you would have to say that God is solely putting what is a man's garment versus a woman's garment solely in the hands of clothing makers, clothing designers. Paris, right? Hollywood, whatever. Paris, what they call it, the fashion people. But even with that, as I said, the pant, the tradition, and I'll say this, and I'll quickly go on. One of the reasons why this thing has persisted, especially in the area of pants, you have to kind of go back to where a lot of times these things began. And a lot of the holiness, what we call the holiness, believe it or not, actually came from people like the Methodist people. And during the time, the 17th, 18th century, even the 19th century, the 1800s, understand that the cultural dress norms, where women wore dresses, long dresses at that, and then men wore trousers. And that's why they interpret that or apply that. And like I say, there's nothing God did not have in His mind pants. Now, like I say, there are a lot of holiness women. In fact, when I grew up, a lot of the people called themselves sanctified. Okay, and sanctified almost became a distinction. Even today, if you ever hear somebody say that I'm sanctified, they mean that they're holiness. And even today, you will see that there are certain women that don't wear pants. And no matter if it's 90 degrees out or whatever, they do not wear pants because they believe it is a sin. They believe they're not saved if they wore that. That is the misunderstanding of this verse. All right, let's continue on. Verse 6, if you come across a bird's nest with chicks or eggs, either in a tree or in the ground along the roads, and your mother is sitting on the chicks and the eggs, you must not take the mother along with the young. You may take the young for yourself, but be sure to let the mother go free so that you may prosper and live long. Now, kind of interesting that God is, you can almost say, animal lover. Yes, He's an animal lover because He created the animal, but He's certainly not like Peter, who believed that animals have rights. But notice He says that there's a certain emotions that's attached to if you go see a mother, just taking a mother with its eggs. Okay, and we see that there are a couple of other commands in the sense that to protect animals. Okay, verse 7. The main thing is don't be cruel. All right, verse 7. Verse 8. If you build a new house, make a railing around your roof so that you don't bring blood guilt on your house if someone falls from it. Remember, houses back then oftentimes were used. The roofs of houses were used as kind of gathering places. We would call them kind of patios or decks. The point is, he says, make a railing so that people won't stumble off. And you can say, well, people shouldn't be so foolish. Well, sometimes they are. Okay. Verse 9, do not plant your vineyards with two types of seed, otherwise the entire harvest, both the crop and the plants, will produce the vineyard, and will be defiled. Do not plow with the ox or donkey together, and do not wear clothes made both of wool and linen. Make tassels the four corners of the outer garments you wear. Okay, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this because this is, again, mostly for Israel. There were some pagan issues that God was addressing here. All right, in terms of the clothes, but notice He says don't make clothes both of wool and linen. I can't speak to that because I'm not a clothes man. I'm a person who makes clothes, so I don't know if that's if they even do that today. All right, let's go on. If a man marries a woman, has sexual relations with her, and comes to hate her, and accuses her of shameful conduct and gives her a bad name, saying, I married this woman and was intimate with her, but I didn't find any evidence of her virginity. The young woman's father and mother will take the evidence of her virginity and bring it to the city elders at the gate. The young woman's father will say to the elders, I gave my daughter to this man as a wife, but he hates her. He accused her of shameful conduct, saying, I didn't find the evidence of my daughter's virginity, but there is an evidence of my daughter's virginity. And they spread out the clothes before the city elders. Then the elders of the city will take the man and punish him. They will also fine him 100 silver shekels and give him to the young man's father, because that man gave an Israelite virgin a bad name, and she will remain his wife. He cannot divorce her as long as he lives. Now, a couple of things here. First and foremost, there's a better way, of course, today that we would detect this. We wouldn't have to. I mean, and sometimes during the wedding nights, the parents would actually wait around and gather the bed sheets. There's a better way, and in fact, you could probably say, you can give the test, the hymen test, right? And then there's a lot of other areas here that we're not going to get into, that he doesn't get into. That, for example, what if the woman was a tomboy and ruptured her hymen, being a tomboy? Now, the Bible doesn't get into that, so we won't. However, you can see how seriously they did take the idea of virginity. Now, the other thing is, of course, that the man's virginity was never put in question. As I said at the beginning when we started studying this, there are a lot of things about Deuteronomy, the law, that and it's just not fair, and never was meant to be fair. And in some cases, this is one example of that. The man's virginity was not at stake, but the woman, look, she called it if she couldn't prove her virginity. Another thing is that, notice this, and I want you to file this because we'll get this to another passage of scripture. That even though he hates her, notice he could not divorce her. I want you to keep that in mind, that wasn't sufficient evidence to divorce. In other words, if the evidence proved to be true, he could have divorced her. If it was proven that she wasn't a virgin when they married, he could have divorced her. But if he hates her, he just and this is the issue. He just turned out he just doesn't like her, and he tried to spread a false name. Then he said, well, you're stuck. Then this comes to this question, what love has to do with it. When it came to the law, nothing. Think about that, because even though this man hates her, he still, once they got married, and one of the ways that the marriage was solid was that it was consummated by the sexual act. He was stuck. All right. But I'm going to come back to that, because notice that he cannot divorce her. Verse 20, but if this accusation is true, and no evidence of the young woman's virginity is found, they will bring the woman to the door of the father's house. The men of the city will stone her to death, for she committed an outrage in Israel by being promiscuous in her father's house. You must purge evil from you. So the idea is here is a woman, being promiscuous, and then of course getting married. The man hates her. Again, this is all kinds of messed up in this respect, because it turns out that it only is predicated on the fact that the man hates her. Verse 22. If a man is discovered having sexual relations with another man's wife, both the man who had sex with the woman and the woman must die. He must purge evil from Israel. Now, so here we see both adulterers were to be stoned. If you go think about the woman that the Pharisees brought to Jesus in John chapter 8, they caught her in the very act, yet they didn't bring the man. So in some respect, they themselves broke the law. See, they themselves broke the law, because notice he said both were to be brought to Israel and both were to be stoned. Verse 23, if there were the young woman who was a virgin engaged to a man, and another man encounters her in the city and has sex with her, you must take the two of them out of the gate of the city and stone them to death. The young woman, because she did not cry out in the city, and the man, because he has violated his neighbor's fiancée. You must purge evil from you. But if a man encounters an engaged woman in an open country and seizes and rapes her, only the man who raped her must die. Do nothing to the young woman because she is not guilty of an offense deserving of death. This is just like the one in which a man attacks his neighbors and murders him. It said, verse 27, when he found her in the field, the engaged woman cried out, but there was no one to rescue her. If the man encountered the young woman, and a virgin is not a virgin who is not engaged, takes hold of her and rapes her, and they are discovered, the man who raped her must give the young woman's father 50 silver shekels, and she must become his wife because he violated her, and he cannot divorce her as long as he lives. And then it says the man is not to marry his father's wife. He must not violate his father's marriage bed. Now, again, this is some very interesting, again, would we do this today? No. Here's an interesting question, and it's only a question because I think God foresaw it wouldn't go that far, because the law, remember, was only given because of transgressions. And as Paul says, that the law was given not to the righteous man, but to an unrighteous man. So in other words, sinful people. The fact that you have to have laws is because of the sinful nature of man. Now that said, there's, like I say, there's some things we don't understand as we know. And by the way, remember, we know from a Christian perspective as well as an Old Testament law perspective, but the what is called the morality of right and wrong. Yeah, it's like I say, it can be strange because, you know, in this case right here, there's a lot put on the woman that today we wouldn't do that. But there's a lot put on the woman, especially in the wake of Me Too. But back then, think about it, the woman pretty much had to prove she was raped. If she did not cry out, it was assumed she was willingly having sex. Now, if you look at that, I mean, and that thought is still argued today in courts when it comes to rape. This is one of the issues of the Me Too movement, right? Well, what is one of a lot of, and by the way, I'm not arguing a pro-con Me Too here. I'm not doing that. I'm just pointing out when you look at how things adjudicated. Like I say, even back then, a woman had to almost prove, right? She had to cry out. When you think about the Me Too movement, and if we was just to apply this to the Me Too movement, think about this now. They're arguing now to say that women have to be believed. And of course that goes too far, because the idea now is that the woman has to believe even if she's a liar. She doesn't have to be proven she's a liar, just the mere fact of it. And of course there's the issue of why didn't she cry out? And of course we know there's a lot of reasons why the woman didn't cry out. There was no advocacy on her part. That's why. She would lose her job, lose her standing in the community, and oftentimes, even to this day, the man goes scot-free. The man is given the benefit of the doubt. Anyway, chapter 17 in our next study. I'll see you then.